two bodies rise off the forest floor at the same moment. 4 feet of muscle lifting into the air, and they wrap around each other so tightly, the seam between them disappears. For the next 40 minutes, neither snake will strike. Neither will open its mouth. And neither will use the venom sitting in glands strong enough to drop a bull elephant in 3 hours. This is not a mating. This is a war with a rule book. And for more than a century, the people watching it got that completely wrong. In the forests of the Western Ghats and the jungles of Thailand, field biologists have filmed this exact scene and reached for the same word without meaning to. Intimate. The braided, swaying motion of 2 king cobras twisted together looks so much like courtship that early naturalists wrote it up as one.
Today we are going to find out how a species famous for eating other snakes, for carrying enough neurotoxin to kill 20 grown men, ended up fighting its rivals with no bite at all, and why scientists spent generations mistaking that fight for love. Ophiophagus hanna means literally snake eater. It is the longest venomous snake alive, stretching past 18 feet in the largest confirmed individuals, and it earns its name by hunting almost nothing but other snakes, including smaller cobras and even pythons. A single bite can deliver enough neurotoxin to shut down the diaphragm of an adult human within 30 minutes, and yet outside the breeding season, this is a solitary, wide-ranging predator, patrolling territories that can stretch across several square kilometers of forest, using its tongue to track the scent trails of prey it may not catch for days. It avoids humans when it can. It avoids its own kind almost as reliably, moving alone through leaf litter that muffles a body 70 pounds heavy on some of the largest specimens ever weighed. And it is one of the few snakes able to climb into trees with enough control to rest coiled several meters off the ground. Then the rains approach, and everything about that solitary pattern breaks. Females begin releasing pheromone trails through the undergrowth in the early months of the year, a chemical signature drifting through humidity and leaf mold. And every male within range reads it as an invitation with a deadline. Researchers working out of the Agumbe Rainforest Research Station in Karnataka, a station co-founded by herpetologist Romulus Whitaker, have tracked how quickly that invitation turns competitive. More than one male frequently converges on the same trail, and when 2 rivals meet along it, neither backs down. The first cycle starts with posture, not violence. Both males lift the front third of their bodies off the ground, sometimes more than 4 feet into the air, hoods held narrow rather than flared, sizing each other up in a silent standoff that can last several minutes before either commits. Neither snake tastes the air toward the other with the quick, searching tongue flicks it would use on prey. Instead, the tongue work slows, almost deliberate, as if each animal were gathering one last read on the rival's size before spending the energy a full contest demands. Then the size difference declares itself, or doesn't, and if the 2 are close in length, the standoff collapses into contact. They twist their raised bodies around one another and begin pushing, each male trying to drive the other's head and neck down toward the forest floor. Whitaker has described the resulting bout as a wrestling match that can run an hour or longer, ending only when one male's advantage becomes unmistakable and he finally pins his rival's head into the dirt. That should be the end of the danger. It isn't. A defeated male in the middle of a king cobra's territory during breeding season is not just an embarrassed loser, he is potential prey. Whitaker's own field team documented a case in which an intruding male, having apparently overpowered the resident male in exactly this kind of combat, immediately used the opportunity to attack and attempt to swallow the female who had been waiting nearby. An event Whitaker and fellow researcher Ajay Shankar published as Combat Dance Cannibalism in 2013. Losing the wrestling match, in other words, can rewrite who eats whom in the next 5 minutes. Here, the story escalates again, because a beaten male does not always leave quietly. Field observations describe losers lingering at the edge of the winner's territory rather than retreating outright, apparently unwilling to concede the female entirely, which forces a second and sometimes third round of combat before one male finally withdraws for good. Each additional round burns energy the snakes cannot easily replace, since a full-grown king cobra may go weeks between meals even in a good season, and an hour of wrestling under tropical heat can push a 17-foot animal to its physical limit. The male who wins the last round is often not the largest snake in the territory. He is the one who had enough left to fight one more time. There is a further danger neither combatant can afford to think about while they are locked together. Two king cobras raised a meter or more off the ground, coiled tightly around one another and straining for balance, are effectively blind to everything outside the contest itself. Whitaker's team at Agumbe has used radio telemetry to follow tagged males for weeks at a stretch, specifically because combat bouts are otherwise almost impossible to predict or find in real time. And the same tracking has shown males traveling far outside their normal range during the breeding season, crossing terrain thick with exactly the kind of predators and exactly the kind of human encounters a solitary cobra would ordinarily avoid. A mongoose, quick enough to dodge a strike and immune to a low dose of the venom, will not attack a healthy adult king cobra under normal circumstances. But a male mid-combat, balanced on the rear third of his body and unable to react to anything but his rival, is not operating under normal circumstances. The escalation does not stop with a single female accepting a single winner.
Researchers studying the newly recognized northern king cobra population in Thailand, in fieldwork published in 2025 by Max Jones, a wildlife conservation scientist then at Virginia Tech, and colleagues, documented males over 12 feet long locked in these bouts for as long as 30 minutes at a stretch, chin driven against the back of the rival's neck, forcing the head down again and again, without a single bite recorded in any observed match. Jones has pointed out the strangeness plainly. These are animals that could kill each other in seconds if they used what they carry in their venom glands, and instead, they fight by a rule neither of them was taught by anyone. Why hold back a weapon that lethal? The likely answer sits in the same genome that makes the fight necessary in the first place. A king cobra that kills every rival male would also be killing potential future mates for its own daughters, shrinking the very population its species depends on. And a wrestling contest that selects for size and stamina without bloodshed accomplishes the same goal: a bigger, stronger bloodline, without the same cost to the group. Charles Darwin himself puzzled over exactly this category of behavior in The Descent of Man, noting that many animals compete for mates through display and combat rather than lethal force, and proposing that female choice and male rivalry, not simple survival, could shape a species' most dramatic features over generations. He never observed a king cobra directly. The species was barely known to Western science in his lifetime, but the logic he laid out in 1871 explains almost exactly what Whitaker's team would film in an Indian rainforest more than a century later. The confusion over what this behavior actually was runs back to the earliest Western scientific accounts of the species. Frank Wall, a British Army physician stationed in colonial India and Ceylon from the 1890s through the 1920s, spent those decades producing some of the first systematic natural history records of Indian snakes, working from direct field observation at a time when almost nothing about king cobra behavior had been documented in the scientific literature at all. Popular and even semi-scientific accounts drawing on that early era of Indian herpetology repeatedly folded combat and courtship into a single description: a snake dance performed for a mate, without distinguishing the wrestling that decides access to her from the far gentler contact that follows. That blurred description persisted largely unchallenged for decades, not because the animals were rare. King cobras were well known to colonial naturalists and to local communities across their range, but because so few observers ever watched a complete encounter from first posture to final cloacal contact and recorded which parts belonged to which behavior. There is a persistent myth built into all of this, and it deserves to be named directly. Many people assume the snakes filmed twisting together in these viral clips are mating because the visual grammar of the scene, the closeness, the rhythm, the raised bodies swaying in unison, reads as tender to a human eye trained on mammal courtship. Wildlife documentaries for decades leaned into that misreading rather than correcting it, since a fight framed as a love scene is an easier sell than a fight framed as a fight. But that is not what is actually happening in the footage.
Two males in combat never touch cloaca to cloaca, never pursue the slow, patient contact that defines actual king cobra courtship. And critically, they never allow the encounter to end in anything but one snake's total physical submission. The confusion runs deep enough that even trained observers in the field have occasionally misjudged which snake had won a given bout, since two king cobras of similar size and pattern are genuinely difficult to tell apart once they are twisted together and both have been driven half into the leaf litter. Real courtship looks different once you know what to watch for, and it only begins after combat has settled the question of who is allowed to attempt it. The winning male approaches the female with far less urgency than his fight suggested, moving his head along the length of her body in a slow, tactile survey that can continue for many minutes before he attempts anything further.
He flicks his tongue against her skin repeatedly, sampling pheromone cues that confirm her receptiveness, and only then aligns his body alongside hers for cloacal contact, a process that itself can last well over an hour. Compared to the wrestling that preceded it, courtship in this species is almost sedate, methodical rather than dramatic, which is part of why the loud, visually spectacular combat dance became the scene people remembered and mislabeled, while the quieter, actual mating passed largely unfilmed and unremarked. Even the hoods stay different throughout. A male in combat rarely bothers to flare his hood at all, saving his display for the moment he stands over a pinned rival, while a male in genuine courtship keeps his hood narrow and his movements unhurried from beginning to end, a visual tell that separates conquest from consent if a viewer knows to look for it. The complications do not end once a pair has mated.
King cobras are the only snakes on Earth known to build a nest for their eggs, and the female who has just mated now faces weeks of labor that puts her at more sustained risk than the male's single hour of combat ever did. She gathers vegetation with the coils of her own body, dragging leaves and debris into a mound that can rise more than a foot off the forest floor, then lays a clutch that typically numbers between 20 and 40 eggs inside a chamber near its top, covering herself in a second layer of leaves above the nest to regulate temperature and hide her position. The decomposing plant matter she has piled generates its own low-grade heat as it breaks down, a natural incubator that keeps the chamber several degrees warmer than the surrounding forest floor, without the female ever needing to coil around the eggs directly, the way pythons do. For the roughly 2 months of incubation that follow, she remains close by and defends the nest against intruders, a level of maternal guarding almost unheard of among snakes, most of which abandon their eggs the moment they are laid. That vigilance carries its own cost. A guarding female cannot range far to hunt, and by the time her eggs hatch, she may be thinner and more vulnerable than she has been in years, and field records note that some females abandon the nest in its final days as their own hunger finally outweighs the instinct to guard, leaving the last stretch of incubation to the heat of the mound alone. The hatchlings that finally emerge face a species-specific hazard almost nowhere else in the reptile world: their own father. Adult king cobras, male and female alike, will eat other king cobras given the chance, and a male that played no role in building the nest has no instinct to spare what hatches from it. The mother's guarding, then, is not only protection from outside predators, but plausibly protection from her own species. And once she finally leaves, the newly hatched young, each one already several times more venomous relative to body size than an adult, and fully capable of a fatal bite within hours of emerging, scatter into the forest with no parental care left at all. Even the identity of the animal at the center of all this turned out to be more complicated than a century of textbooks assumed. Genetic work published in 2021 by a team led by researcher P. Gauri Shankar, building on decades of Whitaker's own fieldwork, demonstrated that what had always been treated as one wide-ranging species, Ophiophagus hanna, is in fact 4 genetically distinct lineages spread across South and Southeast Asia, separated by geography and diverging DNA long before anyone filmed a single combat dance. Scientists had been mistaking multiple species for one for exactly as long as they had been mistaking a fight for a courtship. 2 separate misreadings running in parallel through the same animal's entire documented history. The split mattered beyond bookkeeping. Behavior recorded in one lineage, in a study from southern India or from the newly described northern population researchers have now begun tracking in Thailand, could no longer be assumed to hold automatically for a population thousands of kilometers away, which meant decades of natural history notes filed under a single species name suddenly needed to be resorted by which lineage the observation actually came from before anyone could say with confidence what was typical and what was local. None of this makes the footage less remarkable to watch. It makes it more precise to describe. What plays across a screen, as 2 serpents entwined in something like an embrace, is, every time, a contest with a winner and a loser, run under rules that keep the deadliest bite in the animal kingdom out of play, until the argument over size and stamina has already been settled. The reward for winning is not the fight itself, but the quieter, slower hour that follows it. An hour almost nobody filmed for 100 years because it looked, ironically, far less like romance than the combat everyone assumed romance had to be. Strip away a century of misreading, and what is left is a species that manages 3 separate kinds of restraint inside a single breeding season. Males who could kill each other outright and choose a wrestling match instead. A mother who could abandon her eggs on day 1 like almost every other snake on the planet, and instead spends 2 months defending them at the cost of her own condition. And an entire population that could let the most venomous individuals settle every dispute by biting, and somehow, across an evolutionary history stretching back millions of years, arrived at rules that mostly do not end in death. None of that restraint was designed by anything. It survived because the alternative, a species that solved every rivalry with the bite it was capable of, would have run out of males to compete and mates to compete for, long before it ever reached the forests where cameras finally caught up with it. Right now, in the forests where the monsoon has not yet broken, that same standoff is playing out again. 2 males rising off the ground at once, neither one reaching for the weapon that could end it in a second. Both of them betting everything on which body gives out first.